Welcome, my name is Ryan Belkoff. Today we are going to continue 3 of 3 on OCRA, so standing for Occupational Repetitive Action. So this is an ergonomic assessment that was developed in the 90s by three Italians. Pretty comprehensive. Remember, there's two different types, with the checklist being a lot simpler than the original. So same objectives. So, what is OCRA, how we're using it, and then what recommendations are coming from it. So the one of the last ones here on OCRA is force. So this is one of the, he got a world record for a one finger lift, 265 pounds, which is incredible. I can't even imagine doing it with two arms, let alone one finger. So some people are able to do amazing things. So when we're looking at OCRA for force, there's a number of ways that they left it open on how you could do it. Borg scale, probably the most common. Remember 0 to 10. I like the one where you ask the subject rather than the observer determining how much force. So that subject with a hand dynamometer, you say squeeze as hard as you can, and so that would be a 10. And then based on whatever activity you're doing, have that subject scale it. Of course, you could also do EMG, which is, a lot more cumbersome to do, but that's a valid way to use force with OCRA. So the important part of this, when especially doing this checklist here, base the force on the most prevalent action they're doing. So if they're typing and then they go and they squeeze something, whichever one they are doing for a longer period of time or they feel like is their primary action. So we've gone through most of the variables. One more variable here. So active recovery, again, that's 6 to 1, 20% if there's a recovery occurring. And then that duration, usually that whole period, that 8-hour work shift. The technical actions of frequency, static versus dynamic. Awkward postures, are they sustaining it for a period of time? All those 4 joints. And then the force we just went over, measuring, asking the patient based on the Borg scale, EMG. And now we're to the final one with additional factors. So this last one on additional factors is pretty broad. So we're going to go through each one of these. So vibrating tools, I know my work in construction, vibration tools are all over the place, whether it's a jigsaw, all of them produce pretty much vibration, and that it's common, even though we have good, we've improved greatly with vibration. Remember, there's standards for the hand versus the whole body. The hand can cause that white finger syndrome with vibration. So localized compression, like if you're squeezing something really hard, my main thing I think of was when I was doing sprinkler work and twisting on the irrigation things, doing that, 50 times per site. Most of our workers had carpal tunnel because of the localized compression to their hands. Precision work, I really think about, doing ergonomic assessments on people making medical equipment. Their precision, yes, they were easily doing that 2 to 3 millimeters of tolerance, grinding it, having someone double check it. Cold exposure, I mainly think of, food service industry. Most of those workers, delivering the food in the warehouses, they're constantly exposed to, really cold temperatures. Inadequate gloves. So we've done a research study looking at females because females traditionally don't have the proper glove size. You remember that our traditional is small, medium, and large, and that goes for male or female, and so oftentimes it's not represented correctly. Shock forces, hammering, those type of things, working fast, surprisingly, I remember during the ergonomic assessment, and they were wondering why this station had such turnover, and it was simply they had a high requirement for the amount to be done in comparison to all the others. And yeah, so fast moving, a self-paced is best. Work on slippery objects, doing kitchen work. Oftentimes, especially at the end of the night when you're cleaning the floors, you get those mats out. It's very slick, but there's many other circumstances. When I was recently at the mine, they said in the winter, which, it is often in winter in Montana. Uh, their biggest risk factor of injuries was the compression of the snow because those trucks, so many tons of material going through, it really compresses that snow. It creates ice everywhere. So slipperiness was a huge um, concern for them. And then, of course, we went through that work pace. So that covers all the variables for OCRA. So we are done. That was a lot. So as you can see, OCRA is a little bit more comprehensive, going over that recovery, the duration, the frequency, the awkward postures, 4-6 version, and now additional factors. So, as a result, what we get from OCRA, we divided it up into a number of categories. So, as you can see, the original 6, I believe the checklist is 5. We'll go through that. You know, what I like about it is usually still color coordinated. Green is, a low index value of 1.5, whereas a high one, the top one is a 9.1 or higher. And so similar to like the NIOSH lifting equation, OCRA does have a validation done on it. So they use 5,000 workers. Remember the NIOSH had a lot more, but a lot of these ergonomic assessments don't have a validation studies around it. So it's good to really home in on those ones that have that extra step. And so you can see the odds ratio based on that risk. So, odds ratio of almost 16, it's still lower than the Nash lifting equation, but that's pretty good. And then looking at this relationship. So this is a regression curve. So as the risk category increases, the risk of injury, and 0.98 with a p-value of is well below that 0.05. So good calibration. So this is the checklist. So 6 on the original one, the 5 on the checklist one. Pretty similar, as far as doing a gradient. However, on the checklist, as you compare the two, the original one is 9.1, but the checklist one is 22.6. So how we calculate it does have a difference here. So the good thing about the checklist is definitely simplifies use of verbal anchors. The Borg is a good example of that. Again, the postures are going to be also simplified. So going over an example of how it simplifies with fewer posture scores. All the rest deviations are equal in the checklist. So those are one way. The force scores based on proportion of time is the average and peak forces. So the index score is based on a cycle of that time-weighted average. So OCRA is pretty extensive. It does require you doing it multiple times, and this is your opportunity. We'll go through a couple examples and just doing it. There's no consideration for psychosocial factors, so that's something to consider on this OCRA. And then also, I want to point out with the okra, it's not based on continuous. You're picking out, a particular action. So it's not really, even though it's considered the whole 8 hour, you're picking out particular actions. So these technical actions, you want to review the 6 simulated tasks of the videos available. Rating tasks 3 are actually work tasks of the video from the poultry processing. So just practice, practice. The Italians do have some training to allow you to have more practice with this. Again, check out Dr. Gilkey's publication looking at strain X versus the okra. I welcome any questions. And then hopefully by the end of this that you can use okra and the evaluation process and make recommendations. Thank you.